Okay, I want to go through the opening parts of World of Wonders. And this book it is deceptively easy to read. And so I do want you to read through it and go through it page by page. You will have it. You will think this isn't rough at all. It's not difficult at all. But it uses a rhetorical technique called metonymy. And that's where it puts one image next to another, and with the idea that you can figure out their connection. What it does not do is what we talked about with Antigone, where it uses the words of one thing to describe something else. That's metaphor. What we have with metonymy are two things being juxtaposed, placed right next to each other. And there is a connection between them. But I'll say that it is mostly cognitive in our heads, but also kind of more deeply in our emotional connections to the world. And this gets to why this book is so darn good, is because it works at the level of metonymy, which is very subtle. She'll make connections throughout with things, but she won't shift into metaphors, okay? And I know you might be sitting there thinking, well, that doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't, but as you read through World of Wonders, it will make sense throughout. But if you stop and reread a paragraph, it will probably strike you as strange as she goes through two, sometimes three, radically different elements in ways that are seemingly unconnected. And so let me go through three passages in the early part of World of Wonders. And what I want you to do is make sure you get up to around page 70. That's what we're going to have our first essay on. And it's going to be an in-class style essay. And watch for the metonymies throughout. You're going to see them again and again and again. Like in Sophocles, Sophocles used metaphor. And it was impossible to write about Sophocles or to read Sophocles without coming across metaphors. He is heavily metaphoric throughout all of his plays. What you might notice about World of Wonders, and I will try to pronounce her name, Nezhukumatatil is highly reliant upon metonymy. Okay? And again, let me show you this. And if you go back over her writing, you will see metonymies again and again and again. And if there is an organizing principle for the book, it would be that so much of our emotional and psychological worlds, what I'll call our cognitive lives, are connected to the world around us and to the animals around us and to the plants around us. Okay, let me go ahead and jump in, and you'll see this again and again and again. Let's go to the first one. With fireflies. Fireflies is one of the recurring elements throughout the book, and it brings up metonymies again and again and again. And what happens is that she changes the basic nature of the metonymy throughout. Watch how she does this first one, and this is on page 9. When the first glimmer pop of firefly light appears on a summer night, I always want to call my mother just to say hello. And just pause for a minute and realize that what she did was to bring up the fireflies and then saying hello to her mother. It wasn't something about her mother or a memory of her mother that came up, but the fireflies that came up. And she's putting this element of her mother's relationship to her right next to the fireflies. And this is what she does. The bibliography of the firefly is a tender and eclectic dress, a small flame sputtering in the ditches along a highway. And oh my gosh, is that weird? That is odd. That is easy to read, but stop and think about it for a bit. And I'll tell you this, I have not made full sense out of this sentence yet. Okay? Bibliography would be a list of books. And the bibliography of a firefly is a tender and eccentric dress, or electric dress, a small flame is sputtering in the ditches along the highway. In other words, the books related to the firefly are just the small flames sputtering in the dishes along a highway. And notice, it's not really a flame. There isn't any fire in the firefly. That's a metaphor. That small flame sputtering in the dishes along the highway is a metaphor built within her metonymy. Does she know she's doing this? I think she does. Okay? And so the rhetorical technique I want you to be aware of is metonymy, how two things that don't seem to have relationship to each other are being connected. Okay? And the electric covering of the hind wing of the firefly lift like a light leather, suppler than any other beetle's. In flight, it is like a loud laugh, the kind that only appears in summer, and with the stink of meats sizzling somewhere down the street, and the mouths of the neighborhood children with popsicle juice and hinging open with the excitement of a ball game or tag. Now, something I want you to notice about this passage, and this is so typical of so much of her writing. When she says the kind that only appears in summer, is she referring to the fireflies or to the laughs? And think about it for a moment and take a look at that sentence. In flight, it is like a loud laugh, the kind that only appears in summer, with the stink of meats sizzling somewhere down the street, and the mouths of neighborhood children, and popsicle juice. Again, think about that for a bit. What appears in summer? Is it the loud laughs or the fireflies? The kind that only appears in summer, is ambiguous. It's hard to tell what it's actually referring to. And this happens because of the use of metonymy. That only appears in summer, it seems it could be referring to both of them in extraordinarily different ways, but at the same time. And if you can follow along with that basic point I just made, you will get metonymy. That phrase, the kind that only appears in summer, could be alluding on purpose to both of them through ambiguity. In other words, it's not perfectly clear. And because the memory for her is not entirely clear. Is she remembering the voices or the fireflies in summer? Or is it both? Because they're so joined together in her mind and in her feelings about the summer. That's metonymy. It involves a degree of confusion or ambiguity, I would call it, where it's not entirely clear. And that's the effect of metonymy throughout this entire book. It's a rhetorical technique that she employs again and again and again, where she will bring up a plant or an animal, and what she'll go through is the associations she makes with that plant or that animal, the leaves, the jellyfish, the fireflies, over and over and over again. She associates some kind of living thing, some element of this world, with what goes on inside of us, what goes on inside of our minds, but also in our souls emotionally. Okay, so let me jump to the next one, and I hope you're following along, but I hope it's also not entirely clear, because it shouldn't be. Life isn't always entirely clear, and that's why metonymy is a very useful way for discovering and discussing the nature of our lives, because it isn't always clear. And then she does this, and this is in a scene that is so easy to ignore. And in fact, I only took part of it because I want to emphasize something. This is when she's moved to Phoenix, and she's a new kid in the class. We've just moved to suburban Phoenix, and from a small town in Iowa, where I was the only brown girl in my class. Although my new classmates stared hard at me when I was first introduced, I felt happy to see kids of all shades in the classroom. And if you know anything about Phoenix, you'll know that there's a lot of Mexican American kids and Mexican kids. So there's going to be other kids in the classroom of different ethnicities. There's going to be African American, there's going to be white, there's going to be Latino, there's probably going to be some Asians. This is Phoenix, okay? And so she's glad to be coming there from Iowa, and she's feeling comfortable, and that's kind of nice. Even though they're not of the same ethnic background as her, she's feeling nice because other kids are making her not look so strange, even though they're looking at her. And get the fact that they're probably trying to determine her background from her appearance. And she's aware of that, but it doesn't go too far. Watch where this goes. I watch these classmates go off to the library to search for their animals and ask my teacher if I can just stay and get started on my drawing. And she just wants to stay behind and be trusted to behave herself. And watch her response, the teacher's response. She fumbles in her purse, and I see a pack of cigarettes. No, you may not. We all need to be on the same page, she says. And now the paragraph goes on, and it does go on in a very important and meaningful way. But I want to emphasize, it doesn't go on about anything connected to the cigarettes. That's a use of metonymy again, okay? This is being, the cigarettes in her teacher's purse are being connected, are being juxtaposed, I should say, not so much connected, but juxtaposed, placed next to her refusal to trust her. And so she's learning something about her teacher without her teacher wanting to discuss it. And it's very odd because she's kind of fitting in, but she's kind of not being allowed to be herself. And these things are being juxtaposed to each other. And so the teacher is hiding something here. And we know the teacher is somewhat discriminatory, to say the least. Isn't overtly discriminatory, but she does so in what they would call microaggressions. She shows her hostility in ways that don't overtly show her hostility. It is instead more passive-aggressive, and she doesn't want to discuss it. She doesn't want to bring it out the same way she doesn't want her cigarettes to be seen. But Nezuko Matatil knows it's there, knows it is. Okay, it's trying to be hidden, but it's still there. Okay, and so it's an element that's trying to be hidden, but that's coming out and being seen. And those two images of the cigarettes and the refusal to trust her as a child, she's experiencing both of those, the way they're being held back from her, even though they're not being discussed openly. Okay? And so you're seeing her metonymy at work here, and you'll see it whenever she brings up something and she gives it a very clear, but not well developed, but a clear presence without developing it. She's placing two items next to each other, and here it's the refusal and the cigarettes. And then look at the context it's in. It's in the context of her realizing that she's, in one sense, like all the other kids, but in another sense, very different than the other kids. And the teacher makes her aware of that, but doesn't want it recognized. Okay? And so that's the metonymy once again. Let me go through one more. Okay? The color of jellies and bangles. Okay? And I'm going to go through this kind of carefully, and then I'm going to go through it. I'm just covering 3 of them, but I want to emphasize these exist on every single page of the book. Okay? Every single page you will run into some element of metonymy. It usually takes a little bit longer to develop it more fully. Metaphors are a little bit easier to compress into the writing, and you saw them again at work in Sophocles. Metonymies, she takes a little bit more time to describe both elements, and she doesn't explain any relationship. She wants you to experience them. Okay? And watch where this one goes, because jellies are another important element of metonymies. When I see them in aquariums, I think of the first time I held my glass bangles up to the light. Okay? Now, she's seeing them in aquariums, and what's coming to her memory are the bangles. These are the bracelets that are made of glass. I have always been drawn to color and hue and cry of joy. And I think perhaps, and what she just did there, the hue and cry of joy, that's putting the sound with the color. And she just does that and she moves on. So I want you to be aware, if you slow down, you will pick up these extraordinarily odd connections. And she does not make the connection for you. She juxtaposes the hue and cry of joy. So the color and the sound of joy. That's so odd. Okay, I'll leave that there. And I think perhaps it was because someone on the other side of the planet entrusted those bangles, that fragility, to me when I was so young. What a waterworld comb jellies make. So again, I hope by now you're catching. She just juxtaposed the bangles and the trust that was given to her when they were given to her by her family, by her grandparents. And then she goes into what a waterworld comb jellies make. Suspended, there are millions of rainbows, not in the sky, but in the ocean. Now, something that else is going on in this passage is the juxtaposition of the sky and the ocean. And notice the bracelets exist in the sky. The jellies exist in the ocean. Okay, they're being connected, but they're separate. Okay. I'm sometimes so far into the way down deep, into the dazzle, that only a pale creature like an anglerfish and gulper eels take notice, perhaps imagining for a brief moment. And this is one of the most extraordinary, in my mind, one of the most extraordinary moments in the book. And it comes in this phrase, perhaps imagining for a brief moment. Notice what she's doing. That only a pale creature like an anglerfish or a gulper eel. And she says, perhaps imagining for a moment. She's imagining for a moment from the perspective of an anglerfish or a gulper eel. The delicious luxury of what it's like to be warmed by the sun after the rain. And so they are imagining what it's like to be out of the water and in the sky and being warmed by the sun. But what you realize, what's actually happening, is that a human being is imagining what it would be like to be in the water and to see these jellies and the light going through them. And so what she's doing by giving you a perspective on the anglerfish and the eels is giving you a perspective what it's like to be a young girl fascinated by these bracelets. Okay? And so this complexity that she weaves into these moments is just extraordinary. And it's happening because she's using the device of metonymy, where she's putting things of our world that we know, common elements, such as bangles around her wrist. She's connecting those to jellies under the water. And then she's exploring all the nuances of what it is to be a young girl growing up and these different worlds that she grew up in all along. Okay? I'll leave it there because that's almost 20 minutes. But as you go through the text of World of Wonders, slow down every now and then and notice how strange and how unusual the elements of the paragraph are, the images that she gives you, and start to think through why jellies and bangles, and why talk about anglerfish and gulpers when we're talking about the sun and the rain. She does this again and again and again. And so it's so easy to read so fast through World of Wonders. But I'd like you every now and then to slow down, every now and then, here and there, and just put the different pieces together and realize what she's saying about what's going on in her mind by talking about what's going on in the worlds around us. Take care.